Before we jump into this week's episode of the Major Pain Podcast, I will remind you that I am not a medical professional. Please do not take any medical action based off what you hear on this podcast without first consulting your doctor. I'll also say that if you are enjoying Major Pain, we would love your support to keep the show going. There are several great ways to do so. The first is our ongoing Patreon campaign. Through Patreon, you can subscribe with monthly financial contributions that directly support this show's creation. We have 3 tiers of support: the $2 per month supporter tier, $7 per month patron tier, and $25 per month producer tier. Each tier comes with different levels of recognition on the podcast itself and gifts when you sign up. Our $7 per month patrons will receive a gift of a Major Pain coaster, and our $25 per month producers receive a Major Pain tote bag, both gifts made by my mom. Everyone who signs up on Patreon will gain access to monthly bonus episodes with myself and my partner Andy, where we talk about what's going on in our lives, updates on our health, and the movies and TV and books we are currently enjoying. You can learn more about our Patreon campaign and sign up to support this podcast at patreon.com/majorpainpodcast. Extra special thank you to our Patreon producers supporting this show at the highest tier of $25 per month: Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Other great ways to support this podcast include clicking our affiliate links, which you can find in the show notes of this and every episode. That includes Rare Patient Voice, an amazing program where you can be paid for your time to participate in research studies and surveys. If you have a diagnosis of any kind or you are a caregiver, you qualify to participate in Rare Patient Voice. Sign up using our link, rarepatientvoice.com/majorpainpodcast. And if you participate in a research study or survey, you will earn an average of $120 per hour for your time. You can also support this show when you sign up for NeuroHealth. NeuroHealth is an online headache and neurology clinic where you can get the care you deserve without the wait. Head to neurohealth.co/majorpain to get a discount and support this podcast when you sign up. Or you can head to our Amazon shop, amazon.com/shop/majorpainpodcast. Our shop features products that I use to manage my chronic illness, and Major Pain will earn a commission on any purchases from this shop. Or you can start any Amazon shopping trip from our shop, go on to Amazon, purchase anything at all, and this podcast will still earn a commission. Follow Major Pain on social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast, where you can leave a comment on any episode and interact with other listeners of our growing community. And of course, don't forget to leave Major Pain a positive rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and most major podcast platforms. This show is intended as a free resource for anyone going through chronic illness and disability, to build community around experiences often lived in isolation, to break down the layers of societal ableism, and to help you navigate for your own personal health equity, and also just have a lot of fun. Thank you for checking out the Major Pain Podcast. Let's get to today's episode.
How lucky it is just to get through a day without pain.
If you look at me, it doesn't appear that I have a disability.
A test that comes back abnormal, it's like, yes, we're onto something here.
Welcome to Major Pain. I'm your host, Jesse Mercury, and this week I am here with my guest, Amee. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to chat with you and hear your story, get to know you today. And let's start with the getting to know you part. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am lots of things. Let's see. I am everything but my illness, right? I am middle-aged, married with 2 children, working full-time, and the healthcare field as a healthcare provider. I like to run and work out and eat healthy. I like to meal cook, like my kitchen. So those are kind of my part-time hobbies. Hang out with my friends that are my support system and family. And I like to do all the things. And that can be problematic at times, but we're figuring it out.
Yeah. What type of cooking do you like to do? Are you a by the recipe type person? Is there, a certain type of cooking that you love the most?
Oh, no, I'm an Indian vegetarian who was raised by a little bit of that, pinch of this, pinch of that. So no, I don't follow recipes typically. If I have a recipe, I'm winging it and making it my own anyway. So I usually can't create the same thing twice. They'll be like, oh, that was so good. Can you make it again? And I was like, yeah, it wasn't quite as good this time. I don't really know what I did. So we wing it just like we do everything else.
Yeah, awesome. I'm the same way. I don't know why. I'm allergic to recipes.
Really bad. I don't even ask for a recipe. I'm like, just tell me what's in that and then we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm on the low histamine diet. So it's more like just take the things I can eat and just put them in a certain combination and see if it's good.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, I have to like it. My kids have to eat it, and that's it. The bar is low.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm so excited to hear about your health journey. So let's jump into this. Amee, what is your major pain?
Epilepsy. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, epilepsy. Okay. I think a lot of people are familiar, but just in case someone isn't, what is epilepsy?
In general, it is a chronic brain disorder where there's overfiring of the neurons. It's defined after a person has 2 or more seizures in over a 24-hour time period. There are so many different presentations of it. So my presentation of it is going to look very different from the next person's. And we can get into details of that. It's typically people who are not familiar with it have one kind of idea of what it looks like. And that's what we're gonna, we can kind of break that stigma. And it's invisible, it's chronic, controlled by medication. Sometimes if it's not, then it's considered refractory. And a lot of people struggle with that, and it can really impact your day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple things you just mentioned that are particularly difficult. One is invisible illness, and the other is people's expectations about what your illness will look like, especially with something like epilepsy that is so different from person to person. So what are the specifics? What are the details of what this looks like for you?
For me, I'm diagnosed as simple partial. So for me, I do not lose awareness. So I've never had loss of consciousness. I know my triggers pretty well after this many years of living with it. Again, still unpredictable. You can go, live my life to my book that I've created of keeping things under control. And it can still happen. I am very regimented because of it. And I've had it my whole life, but it's really flared up this last year. So that's kind of changed things tremendously. It's kind of made me tune in to, okay, well, this is real. It's not just pop your pills in a bar with tequila shots anymore.
Oh, those were the days, right?
Yeah, those were the days. And that's not quite the case anymore. And so we've started to talk about it, learn about it, and really tune into our own bodies.
Yeah. What does it mean to have simple partial epilepsy?
So for me, it is still motor. It has motor implications. So mine starts in the right fingers, and you kind of see it kind of twitch. And I'm conscious through the whole thing. So I don't have the typical, you fall over, complete body seizure or movement, convulsive movements. And I'm aware the entire time. So I can talk to you through the whole time, last anywhere from a couple of seconds to about 1 to 30 seconds. So I would say I'm pretty fortunate in the realm of the severity of what the disease is and what it comes with. What my biggest realm is, we take the same medications no matter what type of epilepsy you have. And the side effects of those are a major pain.
Wow. Interesting. What are the side effects of the medication?
For me, it presents more in the form of brain fog, like memory loss, kind of getting my words together the right way. And since the change in medications over the last year, it's very different than what I'm used to. Working in the medical profession, so I have a little bit of background knowledge of these medications. And when they're like, "I'm going to put you on this," I'm like, "Oh no, absolutely not." And, it is what it is. And you open that paper like everybody else, and it has a whole list of side effects. And like, all right, let's see what's going to hit us this time.
How much does it help to be on the medication? It sounds like it's a real calculation of, this is going to make me feel worse in one way, but hopefully help control these seizures.
Exactly. It's a trial and error, and it's going to look different for everybody. And so, you want to find that sweet spot of taking the lowest amount of medication and still having control of the condition is always the goal. And, sometimes the side effects, you just have to kind of tolerate them is where I'm at. And I can deal with memory loss. I'm 44 and perimenopausal. I mean, that's just kind of what comes with my game anyway. So I don't feel alone in that sense. So we just forget a lot of things. And if that's the worst of it, then hey, you pick your battles.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of my own experience with brain fog, and I just turned 40, so we're close in age. I don't have kids yet, but we want I just got married and we really want to have kids. And I'm just, this has been a discussion recently of living with chronic illness and the limitations that can put on someone, and having kids. I mean, that's like a full-time job that you got to show up for. And I'm trying to imagine having, severe brain fog, having seizures in front of children. What has that been like for you?
I have not had a seizure in front of my children.
Wow.
I'm usually able to know if it's coming on. It's pretty predictable, and I'm able to just kind of move to a separate area and come back like nothing happened. And that's it's so fortunate that mine presents that way. And so it hasn't really affected my children. My children have never seen it occur.
Wow.
We don't even know. It's like I'm back to lifing, because that's just what I am able to do. And I call it fortunate, right? In my case, some people are like, oh, I've got to do this. And I'm just like, I get to do this.
Wow.
So it really is a perspective shift. And I think this year has been very eye-opening in that sense of the things that I used to say, oh, I have to do, are now, well, wow, I get to do.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Your disease is, we talked about invisible illness. It can be invisible even from your own children. That's really interesting. How old are your kids?
My kids are 14 and 12.
Wow. Is this a discussion you've had with them? Is it, something you've talked about?
It is. It's a discussion we've had. It's something we've talked about. But my hesitation, or the reason I would never want them to feel like they wouldn't want me to be somewhere, or I couldn't be there for them, or they couldn't approach me with something, because then I would be a burden to them. Right? Like they're children. They should be able to come to their mother for things. And I have very emotionally aware children. And so it also depends on, your child's personality. But I think I would find situations where my kids would keep things from me because they would think it would just stress me out. And I don't want to do that to them, or I want to create a safe space for them without them having to feel like a burden. So it's just an added layer of thought, I think, that I have to put behind.
Yeah. I mean, all these, tendrils that sneak into the rest of your life of the way that having a chronic illness impacts not just yourself, but the people around you. And these really complicated feelings of guilt that can arise over something that is not your fault, but is still your body. How do we disentangle that? That's, one of the age-old questions.
And sometimes the reality is me having spent the last year of accepting it and being like, hey, I cannot do this because it is not in my best interest. And that's been huge for me. And I call it growth. Kind of knowing your boundaries and knowing your limitations has been growth for me, to being like, good, if I can do this today, but I know I won't be able to do this 2 days in a row. So I just have to pick one. It's like that energy allocation. And sometimes it's just really hard when it involves your kids. I mean, your friends can understand, you'll see them again later. I have a very supportive husband. He's always there to pick up the pieces, but mama's mama, And it's very hard sometimes.
And if you have this additional major pain of the side effects of the medication, how does that impact being a mother?
Fatigue is fatigue. And I think we all kind of live in a state of fatigue, and it comes with it. And so memory loss is like, we just have more notes, and now they've become my reminders. Be like, guys, you got to remind me, so it's almost like we've role reversed in the sense of they take accountability if they have something that we need to get done. I'm like, guys, you have to remind me on this day when we have to do this for X, Y, or Z, and that's where they have become my support system in a weird way. It's like, I don't put all that pressure on myself to be like, oh my God, I have to be responsible. I'm like, no, they're at an age now where they can also, it's okay for me to be like, look, you're telling me you got to wear green on Thursday. Can you remind me on Wednesday? Let's put in a calendar. Let's make a note of it. Let's set a timer for it. Let's work on this together. So things like that, I've taken the burden of taking 100% responsibility, and we've used it as kind of as a team effort.
Yeah. And those are great skills for kids to be developing.
Yeah. And in the long run, I think it's kind of helping them. I mean, my son's made his own lunch every single morning is long as he's known. And that's not because I wouldn't love to be that mother who like makes their lunch, writes sweet, little notes in them and puts them and send them off to school, 10 years ago. Yes. And now it's just like, buddy, I can't do this. And it's never been said. It's just something he's known to do. He just does it. He almost prefers it.
Wow. Yeah. How old were you when you started having seizures?
Oh, I've had this since I was 8. So I was diagnosed with the illness at a very young age.
Wow.
And it was just manageable with one medication for my entire life. And my current husband, who was my boyfriend at a very young age, we've been together for years, knew about the condition and knew the implications and family planning, just like you can probably relate to at the stage you're at in life. And that was a big, like, look, this is what I have. Are you committed to this? This is what I have. And this is a challenge. Like, I don't know that I will be able to provide you a family. I'm on this medication that causes birth defects. It's like the number.
Really?
Thing. Yeah.
Wow.
And so, going through that whole process, he's been with me by my side. And thankfully we have 2 healthy children now, but it was not easy. And
yeah, wow, what an incredibly difficult decision to wrap your mind around. So did you stay on that medication while you were trying to conceive, or do you go off of it for a time? What is the process there?
no, so I was with a neurologist, under the care of a neurologist, who I was going through the process of switching because we knew that had to be done. I just had to be switching medications, and it was a risk we took. I quit working for 8 months. I quit driving for a long time because you don't know what that change is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was what we decided to do. And there were days where I remember both of us just kind of bawling and being like, just throw in the towel because this sucks. It was just hard. And we were like, maybe a family or having children is not what we want. And that's okay. Maybe our life is just fine with just the 2 of us, which is also okay. And our neurologist at that point, at looking back, was just not the best versed, I think, in women's healthcare in managing epilepsy. And I always tell people I advocate now for really telling your story and owning it. Because had I not spoken out to one person who was in the field of neurology, I would not have met the amazing, amazing neurologist that I have now, who was very well versed in women's health. So I switched neurologist after I was 3 months pregnant. So I did end up getting pregnant with the switch. And I saw this new neurologist who I met at that time. And the way things aligned was just completely different. She had me continue to switch to a new medication. It was more manageable. It was more controlled. She was just more versed in areas. And as a healthcare provider, that's okay. But as a patient, you really have to advocate for yourself when you know something.
Absolutely. So important. And I mean, this is a really important topic also. The fact that a lot of healthcare providers are not necessarily fluent in women's care, which is terrifying. But my wife had this problem. She had a pituitary adenoma, and she was seeing an endocrinologist, and she was having hormonal fluctuations because of this thing and was causing emotional symptoms. And he just completely wrote that off. He said, no, that's not a thing. And then through this podcast, she actually told her story and then was connected to a patient who has a local female endocrinologist that she then was able to switch to. And it's a totally different story, So it's another thing about the medical system, the way that practitioners are trained and taught, that really needs to change. I mean, this is a huge problem. And I'm so glad that you found the care that you deserve. I mean, it's kind of terrifying when you think about that, you're family planning, you are a woman, you are looking to get pregnant, and you're on this medication that can cause birth defects, to not have a doctor who can really understand that and talk through that with you. I mean, you are making lifelong choices here, and you need that support. That is a critical moment where you need support. I'm so glad to hear that lined up at the moment where you ended up switching doctors.
It couldn't have been more perfect. And I still see her to this day. She's still my current neurologist. And At 44, you go through hormone changes all over again, which is why I think this is hitting me in the face. And she is, again, been so supportive. So anyone out there listening with a chronic illness, really, really important to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And reach out.
So for anyone who's listening who may have epilepsy, who's thinking about getting pregnant, what would you recommend to that person? What is the process that you think might be the safest course?
Yeah, getting on, if you're controlled through medication, now it's going to be different for everybody, right? I was very fortunate that it was just a switching of a medication that worked for me. And I have 2 healthy, beautiful children and currently on that and more medication now, but that had nothing to do with my pregnancies. It's possible, I would say, for me. I can't make a blanket statement and say every woman that has this condition can have children because I'm not versed like that. And I think it's just finding the right neurologist or the right specialist who does know and understand and is versed in that topic.
Yeah, that great advice. And, it really speaks to the reality, which is that these diseases are different for everyone. Yeah. And if you are having a concern that your doctor is brushing off, then maybe it's time to try a different doctor. And, it all comes back to advocating for yourself, which is such a difficult thing to do because we are societally trained to listen to what our doctors tell us without question. But this is your body and you are the one who lives in this body. Your doctor doesn't live in your body, Your doctor doesn't take your body home on weekends and live in it so that they know what it's like to live in your body. Can you imagine how different the world would be? Yeah. So you have to make these choices for yourself. And if you don't feel good about what your doctor is recommending, second opinions exist for a reason, and it is okay to pursue that.
Yes. In the healthcare field, I encourage second and third opinions to my own patients. I am not the queen of knowing everything about everything in the field I'm in either. And we're a team, and there's people that are going to be better versed in certain areas than others. And it's okay to admit that, and it's okay to seek that.
Yeah. So important. When you were 8 years old, do you remember what was your first seizure? What happened? Where were you? What did you think was happening? I'd love to hear about this turning point in your life.
I was 8 years old and mama and daddy's girl. So guess what? I slept with my parents. And that's just what I did. I was the one knocking on their door. I'm one of 3 children. And if a child was knocking on the door to come sleep in mom and dad's bed, it was me. And things happen for a reason, because my first seizure was in the middle of the night while sleeping next to my parents.
Wow.
And I don't lose consciousness. And so I knew something was going on. I knew everything that was going on. I was able to verbalize it after it was done. And I was taken to the hospital, run all the tests. I grew up in a really small town who didn't have pediatric neurologist available. I had the best pediatrician and was referred an hour and a half away to a children's hospital where I received very good care by a pediatric neurologist.
So you're lying in bed and you essentially become locked in your own body, and are you shaking and you just can't control what's happening?
Yeah. The very first one was more severe because obviously it wasn't controlled.
Sure.
With patients, I was just a normal, healthy child who went to bed just like every other 8-year-old goes to bed one night. And just woke up in a different situation that day. And I was aware that I did not have control over my body.
And what does that feel like as an 8-year-old? That must be terrifying.
Terrifying, because I could describe what happened, but you can't understand what happened. Now, as an adult, you can do your research and you can read about it. And this was back in dial-up days, this is like, so I'm not online reading about what's going on. I'm just kind of listening and taking what my parents give me that the neurologist has prescribed. And we're just trying to go on. And I was fortunate that it worked, and I was able to be independent and went off to college and graduate school. And I just, I have a lot of gratitude in my story. Although it's not perfect, I'm doing well.
Yeah. So there's this big long period after 8 years old where you get on medication and it controls it well. But what does that mean? What does that look like? How often are you having seizures once it's controlled?
When it was controlled, I would say once a year,
Wow.
so no big deal. Again, I hadn't told any of my friends, hadn't told anyone in college, hadn't told anyone but my boyfriend that I'd been dating, that I was like, hey, look, by the way, this is something that I take medication every day, and this is what I have just in case. And they only happen at night. When they did happen, rarely, it was only nocturnal. And so it was something that he should have been aware of, it was like, look, and he was committed. I think it was more terrifying for him the first time that it ever happened.
Mm. How long had you been together when you had your first seizure in front of him?
Say about 2 to 3 years.
Wow. Wow.
So he knew, he just hadn't seen, or, it was part of taking the medication and going out, and we were doing our thing. And it had been a few years before he had seen anything. And I was like, well, if you're still going to stick around after that, then this might work. But if this was not for you, then that's okay too.
Yeah. And that must feel so vulnerable to have this thing that is, it's sort of invisible because of circumstance. But then because of that, maybe something that, like, where is the line between something being invisible just because that's how things are working out and hiding something? Like, where is that line? And I know, as someone with a chronic illness, the temptation to ignore it and hide it and keep it secret is, if you can do that, that temptation is very strong. Again, because of societal norms, because society tells you that if you have anything wrong with you, then you're flawed in some way, which is so ridiculous because we're all flawed. We all have something wrong with us. And the foundation of this show is like, let's talk about it. Let's share it with each other and try to break down this societal norm that we're not supposed to. But I fully recognize that societal norm exists. So where are you on that spectrum at this moment where you have this seizure in front of your boyfriend for the first time, where this thing that is, you've been upfront about with this one person, maybe your friends don't know about, it's sort of secret, and then this one person sees it for real. I mean, that feeling of vulnerability must have been very intense.
And now it was just our secret. You still didn't go out and talk about it. It was still not something that, because we just didn't have to. Fortunately, it wasn't something that I felt anyone needed to know because of societal expectations and norms. And coming from, a South Asian background, it's like, what are people going to think? Any background, really, it's like, what are people going to think? What are they going to assume? Are they going to put limitations on me that I'm not putting on myself? Are they going to put me in a box and tell me what I can do and what I can't do? There's all these thoughts that go through your head, and just get myself out of it by keeping it to myself. I don't encourage that this many years later.
Yeah. And that's like a lifelong journey to get to the point where you don't encourage that. And what has changed along the way?
So I just started talking about this last year. And if you do the math, that's about 35 years after.
Yeah.
And it was kind of when I was struggling with it a little bit more clearly in the last year. And I was going to be electively hospitalized to have testing done to trigger a seizure, to find out where they're coming from and whatnot. And guess what? I wasn't going to tell people I was on the beach in Cancun drinking margaritas this time. It was like, we're going to talk about this and we're going to educate people on this. And the first time I tried to talk about it, because it was difficult, I was told not to talk about it. And that kind of fuel a fire of like, I could do two things. I could sit and feel sorry for myself and listen and fall into the societal norms, or I can use it as a tool of education and empowerment. And I chose the second route.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about it. I'm going to empower myself through the process, and I'm going to educate others. And two things can coexist.
Wow. And it seems like maybe just, 35 years of doing the opposite, was this building up inside of you the whole time, this need to go public with this?
It wasn't. I was almost content with it being private because it didn't affect my day to day, and I didn't want to deal with the judgments, and I didn't want to explain myself, and I didn't want to talk about it. But when it gets to the point where you're going to be off the face of the earth, I refuse to lie about it. I couldn't, I was starting to hold back on socializing a little bit. I stopped drinking. And so my habits were starting to change within the last year. And I refused to lie about why I was changing my habits.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when I decided to become crystal clear on, look, this is what has been going on. And my friends I've known for 20 plus years didn't know.
Wow. I mean, what does that conversation look like? How did your friends react?
I mean, the amount of support that is there right in front of you is immense. So for anyone out there who's not, your support system is in front of you. They just don't know. I mean, imagine having a friend going through something and you are not able to be there for them. And you didn't know this whole time. You can't help someone who's not, who you don't know needs it.
Yeah. And then how does that change you once you finally start to open up about this thing? Is it like this piece of yourself sort of locking into place in a way you wouldn't have expected?
Yeah, I think the trajectory of my entire future is going to change. It's so crazy how something so negatively can be changed into something so positive because that's the route that I choose to take. Yes, it sucks. Yes, it sucks. And yes, it changes how I function and what I can do and the decisions I make. And no, I can't be I can show up everywhere. I have FOMO just like the rest of us do. But it's very empowering to set my boundaries, to stick to those boundaries, have the people who respect those boundaries respect them, and everyone else can just move on.
Yeah.
And that's, that's unfortunate that it took this long, but it better late than never.
Yeah. And, I relate to that so much. My disease was very much in the closet for a long time until it got so bad that I was falling off the face of the earth. And it, this happened to me a couple times in my life. And the first time in my 20s, I never opened up about it. And it deeply impacted relationships. People thought that I didn't want to hang out with them anymore because I wasn't really telling them. Or if I was telling them, I was like kind of, self-gaslighting myself and saying, oh, it's not that bad. I'm just feeling a little sick. One of those conversations with one of those friends years later where we really discovered that I had done that happened on this podcast with my friend Chris Fowler, who's a pain researcher. There was a episode a while back where I realized, like he didn't know what I was going through. And he was like my closest friend at the time when I was going through it. And I didn't really open up to him about it. And it deeply impacted our friendship, a huge misunderstanding, miscommunication. So, and, starting this podcast was my moment to really go public. And it's because I was stuck at home in a flare-up and I was realizing that hiding it meant that I was then hiding myself because it had kind of taken over at that point in my life. And it meant that I was just locking myself in a cave where no one else could see me. And that's just so bad for you, going through the health thing and going through the isolation thing at the same time happens to a lot of us. And because of this societal pressure to not talk about it. And like you said, the first time you opened up about it, you got pushback. And I think that happens to a lot of us. And then for a lot of us, that just shuts it down. It's like, oh, well, I can't do this. People won't like me anymore. People won't want to be my friend anymore. And I can tell you from experience, and it sounds like your experience is the same, the people that won't like you and the people that don't want to be your friend anymore are not worth being friends with. We had a guest, I always remember this, Amee, who said chronic illness is a crappy person detector, which it's so true. Yeah, it's so true. Those people are not worth investing your time and your effort and your friendship into. And the people who are going to be there for you and are going to support you. So why not? Why not be open and find out who those people are? The worst you have to lose is friends that aren't necessarily your friends. So it's been wildly positive in my life to open up about my chronic illness. And because I've been so open about it, I've gotten so much information about how to deal with it where I was undiagnosed. I learned so much to take to my doctors, got diagnosed, and now I'm doing the best I've ever been. Like my health has skyrocketed because I finally have a diagnosis and medication and a treatment regimen, and it's working remarkably well. I just got back from my honeymoon, and we ended our honeymoon by going to Disneyland not Disneyland, Disney World, excuse me. We went to Animal Kingdom, and then we did a day at Universal to do the Harry Potter stuff, and then we did a day at Epcot. And that was 3 days of theme parking on my feet, and I did it. And the last time I went to Disneyland, which was a couple years ago, I was in a wheelchair. And going to Disneyland in a wheelchair was a huge victory because it's like, wow, I can actually do stuff still, And now here I am 2 years later doing 3 days of theme park on my feet. I mean, that is unbelievable. And it's because I got a diagnosis and medication. And it's because I was willing to open up and talk to other people about it. It has completely changed my life for the better. And it has also healed something in me, this shame over being sick, which is useless. It's normal, and it happens to all of us, but it is not, I say useless in the way that there is no use in your life to feeling shame over your illness. And we all have it, but opening up about it is a way to start to change the ratio of shame to self-confidence. And that, I think, is a very worthwhile thing to do. And I'm not saying that like all of my shame is gone. I don't think that'll ever happen. But the ratio is so different now where I actually have a lot of pride in what I've lived through and what I've accomplished and achieved on top of that, on top of making this podcast, which is like such a huge joy for me, and giving other people a platform to share their stories. I mean, my life is so different because I was willing to cross that line and talk about it out loud. So I can't say enough good things about doing so.
Yeah, I completely align with everything you're saying. I mean, I could have spent the first half of the year, and I actually did. I mean, I remember January, February, March was really isolating. I was just ruminating in all the I can'ts. Like, gosh, I really want to be at dinner with my girlfriends, and I'm just going to brush it off and not go because I needed to save that energy for still got to go to work, and then my neurologist finally convinced me to do this. She's been telling me to do this for 16 years. We need you in the hospital. We need to see this happen. I need you to stay. At that point, there was like no choice. I started the Instagram page. It was like, we're going all in. We're going all in. We're going to share our story, and we're not going to lie about it. I'm not going to lie to myself about it. That was the biggest thing. And I was in therapy and coaching and really encouraged to use my voice. And it's been nothing but just great things.
Yeah, amazing. Let's talk about this last year where things have gotten more severe. What happened? I mean, what does that look like for you? Is it just, you've been on one medication too long and it's not as effective anymore? Is it just you reach that point in life where, our bodies are always changing? It's just there's a change and now something has shifted. Do you even know? I mean, what has it been?
No, yeah. The thing with epilepsy is, with my case at least, is there's no one knows. And so we're on medication, and then all of a sudden everything changed. I had my last espresso martini, and God damn it, I do miss drinking, And it was last year in November, actually, right around this time. And ironically, I celebrated my 43rd birthday, and I did it as an unspoken fundraiser. And I raised money for a foundation, and it was a very gratitude. The birthday was out of gratitude. And then it ended up being like reverse karma in some way. And I still don't, I don't mean it in that sense, but then shit hit the fan in December. And it's just like, I think it's age, hormones, who knows? But here we are.
Yeah.
And you're going with the punches, and we're taking this ride, and we're making the most of it.
So does that mean that the frequency of seizures just all of a sudden just pops way up?
Yeah, like the medication was not as effective, the one medication. So now I'm on 3, which comes with 3 times the side effects, and still trying to manage that. I think we're in a good place now where we've gotten control of that, and we're starting to turn around, and it's motivated me to even professionally switch gears and kind of feel my passion of helping others and kind of telling people not to do what I've been doing, because there's so much inspiration in owning your truth, just like you said.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. There's so much liberation in owning your truth. I love that. And, switching medications is such a huge deal. When you have a complex chronic illness, it's because you have to change your body chemistry and you have to spend so much time doing so. And, I've been on medication for mast cell activation syndrome for, I think, a little over 2 years at this point, and I'm still getting better. I'm still figuring out like what is the upper end of what this medication can do for me. And also still discovering new things about my body that are, adjusting the medication. And then whenever you adjust one thing, maybe something else can come out, but then you have to try them one at a time. And each one that you try is going to take months because it might seem okay at first, but then you start to get worse. And then you have to trace back in time. What did I do differently? And you have to reverse that thing. It is so complicated. And the more medications you add in, the more complicating factors there are. You become a science experiment that you're sort of testing yourself on. So, just all that to say, going from 1 medication to 3 is something that's like, oh yeah, I did that thing, but I'm reading between the lines. Like, I'm sure that's what the experience is of like trying to switch medications. It's a huge deal.
Yeah. And, someone coming from a health perspective, it's just like, I don't like putting foreign things into my body. And it's just coming to that acceptance of like, well, this is what I need. And you just gotta get over it. And it is what it is. We're fortunate, right? We're fortunate to have these available to us and accessible to us to help and support our quality of life.
Yeah, that's so.
None of it's perfect, but we need it.
Yeah, that's so important too. I mean, I feel the same way. Every time I take medication, when I first started my treatment regimen, there's this huge voice in my head saying like, well, you should do this as little as possible, But then if it's something that you need for your entire life, as little as possible is every day forever. And then you have to find a way to get that voice that's telling you that that's bad for you to shut up because it's wrong. If you need the medication, that's what's good for you. That's the healthy thing to do, is to take the medication. And that can be like really hard to change, again, this like societal internal thing where society tells you, oh, well, we need to live these all natural, organic lifestyles. You can't have any chemicals in your body. It's like, yeah, well, this one chemical is the reason that I'm able to walk. So, that's an important chemical for me. Yeah. So it's like so much shifting and like mental gymnastics to try to convince yourself to be okay with that.
It's accepting it. It really is. And talking about it helps with accepting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about talking about it. Tell me about your Instagram, public advocacy. Like, that's a huge leap from this person who didn't talk about this for 35 years to being a public advocate. What's that been like?
I went from 0 to 100. There was like, it was no like, let me call my friend and let me tell her. It's just like, you know what? No, we're just going to start an Instagram page and we're just going to talk about it. And you can choose to be here, or you can make a choice not to be here, because you will find our discomfort makes other people uncomfortable. People become uncomfortable about something they don't know about, but it's someone they know. And that's coming out of a place of care, right? And I do look back at being told not to talk about it was coming from a place of care, was coming from a place of protecting me from society. But I know myself, and I knew that wasn't right for me. Ruminating and sitting in it by myself in isolation was not going to provide me any benefits, mental health wise. It just wasn't. And I've got 2 kids. I was thinking about, what example am I going to live? What example am I going to show them? Do I want them to sit with any struggle on their own? No, absolutely not. Reach out to me, to your friends, to somebody, so we can provide you the access to care, to help that you need. So it was really sitting back and be like, what example am I setting to my own children? And it was a lot of thought put in. It wasn't just an impulsive move where I woke up one day and be like, I'm going to be impulsive and we're going to talk about it. It was very thought out. I had a lot of time to myself, thinking about how I was going to do it. It was very intentional with it. And my page is behind the bindis. Now, bindi is the dot on the forehead that South Asian women wear. And it was kind of like, we live this life like, as an Indian woman. And now I'm going to go into the cultural aspects because that's kind of what my trigger was on speaking of my story. Is we live this life of perfection. And that means, okay, you got married, you have your children, you have a white picket fence, and you have a doctorate degree. Okay, now we can't talk about what's real because really none of that matters when it comes to your health. Right? Like what does that matter? And so it was really just kind of breaking that stigma and being like, guys, let's talk about what's real. Does it matter if you're married? Does it matter that you had children? Does it all these things that society tells you should do? And then we get shut down and we talk about what matters.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to shine light, and kind of someone has to start it, and yourself and myself, and the more people that do it, it becomes normalized.
And what has the reaction been since you've launched this?
It's been great. I've had nothing but support. I've had many platforms I've shared my story with. I have a deep passion for it. It's encouraged me to kind of dive into my passion, just like this podcast is for you. And kind of going back, and I'm starting to dive into potentially getting more education and going into coaching and things like that to be, a certified support system for other people. Because I don't want people to do what I've done when the support is there.
Wow. Amazing. Your story is incredible. It's been a very affirming conversation for me. This is the first one I've recorded in a month because I was on my honeymoon. I did release an episode last week, but that was recorded before I left. And I'm just in like the midst of this incredibly busy time in my life. I've started 2 jobs since being well enough to work after being on disability, which I'm, was so incredibly lucky and grateful to get after fighting for years. Then got so much better. I was able to go back to work. And now I'm just like so busy, and so many things are pulling on me from different directions. And this is, coming back to this project in the midst of this incredibly busy time in my life after getting married and all of that. I mean, this conversation has been really powerful and really important to me because it's so grounding in why I do this. And I'm just really grateful for you being here and sharing your incredible story. And I love that sort of the core theme of this conversation has been living your truth, letting go of what other people think about you and living the reality of what you're experiencing as someone who has a chronic illness that you didn't cause, wasn't your fault, but still is something that becomes this companion that lives with you throughout your life. So if you think of it as like a personified part of you, what is your relationship to epilepsy now? I mean, it's this thing that's been a part of you for so long, from 8 to 44 years old, and your relationship just changed significantly in the last year. How do you feel about it in general? If it were like a person that lives with you, like a friend or an enemy, what is it now?
It's a companion. And guess what? We're married. It's not going anywhere. There's no option of divorce, right? It's like this little guy that's coming with me, and we're going to work together, and we're going to figure this out. And some days I'm going to let you make the decisions, and some days I'm going to take control of this. And it's a ping pong. We're going back and forth. And there's no right or there's no wrong. There's no win. There's no lose. We're learning how to do this together.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question for you. If you could go back in time to 8 years old, with everything you know now, is there a message that you would share with yourself at that point in life about living with epilepsy?
At the age of 8, I think it's very crucial. And at this, I want to speak to the parents of the child, because at the age of 8, I don't know that you have the mental capacity to even understand a chronic condition. You haven't lived, maybe by the time you're 16, 17, 18, you're starting to grasp how it's going to affect your life and how you're going to work with it. But I think at the age of 8, as a parent speaking, I would like to speak to the parents of creating that empowerment around whatever that chronic illness is, and instilling that empowerment to an 8-year-old, because that can't be done on their own at 8. Now, if you're 16 or 17, I think that's different. But at the age of 8, and my parents did empower me, but it was never talked about. And I would say, if I had an 8-year-old, I would say, guess what? This is your superpower. I'm going to empower you to talk about it. I'm going to teach you. That's going to tell you who your friends are and who you aren't. This is making you a more resilient person. This is making you a more empathetic person. And I think changing the narrative to that, to an 8-year-old, is very crucial.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing answer. Amee, what an incredible conversation. You've done such a fantastic job on the podcast today. Please tell our listeners where they can go to connect with you online. I'm sure people are going to want to check out your advocacy work after listening to this podcast. So yeah, anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, I am on Instagram at Behind the Bindies, which is, I'm sure you may be able to type that out. It's long and there is cultural significance to that, but own your truth. And there's going to be people that accept it. There's going to be some pushback, but you are you, and you didn't sign up for this, and it's coming with you. So we're going to learn to dance together, and don't let anybody tell you what you can't do. The sky is the limit that you put on it.
Yeah, amazing. I will put a link to that in the show notes. I will tag you on Instagram when this episode goes out. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your story with us today. You did such an incredible job.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Major Pain. I'm Jesse Mercury, your host and the producer of this podcast. Artwork by Egg Salad Salad. Our theme music is the song Time Machine from my synth-pop album Sci-Fi, now streaming everywhere. Support this show on social media: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast. If you have questions or comments you'd like to share with myself, our guests, or our listeners, send an email to majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about this show, support its creation, or comment on any episode at majorpainpodcast.com. Major Pain is supported by our listeners on Patreon. Thank you to our $2 per month supporters, our $7 per month patrons Naomi Adele Smith, Sonny Roberts, Kelsey Matson, Alexandria Henderson, Justin Minnick, Laura Stevens, Heather Muncie, and Robert, and our $25 per month producers Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Learn how you can support this podcast while receiving special recognition on the show, gifts, and monthly bonus episodes at patreon.com/majorpainpodcasts.